Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So today I'm going to show you how to sharpen your chainsaw, whether the chain is on the saw or off the saw. Either way, I've got you covered. Now for the purposes of this video, I will be using a tabletop vise. I'll also be using this. This is a chainsaw file. You can find these at your local hardware store and they'll always be hanging right there with the chainsaws. There are several different sizes of file out there, so you need to make sure that you get the right one. If you're not sure what size you need to get, you can always find this information on the package that your chain came in. So let's set up that chain for sharpening. If your chain is already off your saw, this is very easy to do. Just clamp it into place like I'm showing you here. It's very important that we do not want the chain to move or wiggle as we sharpen. If your chain is off the saw, the setup is slightly more complicated, but it's not that big of a deal. Instead, we'll be using the vise to clamp the bar itself, but in a manner that we can still rotate the chain around the bar. The chain is not supposed to be touching any part of the vise for this. Sometimes you need to elevate the engine or flip the saw upside down to get the right angle for this. Again, we do not want that chain to wiggle or move while we sharpen. So tighten that chain down and engage your chain brake too. You're going to need to mark a starting point on your chain so you know when to stop. I usually use a Sharpie for this, but a dab of whiteout or paint will also do the trick too. So now we are ready to sharpen. But first, take a close look at the individual teeth on your chain. Most have a tiny line on them indicating the angle of the cutting edge. Your file will also need to have that same angle when you slide it along that edge. Now when you hold that file, hold it at both ends. This will allow for the best and most even sharpening. Use an even number of strokes on each tooth of your chain. Chainsaws use their teeth evenly, so they need to be sharpened evenly as well. Do not forget that your file needs to run parallel with that little guideline and perpendicular to the bar. You do not need to use a lot of pressure when you sharpen here. It's really best to think of it as sliding rather than filing. Now I see a lot of guys do this wrong. I see them ripping that file through the teeth and then they wonder why they have to sharpen so often. It's because they're not being delicate enough. If your file is catching on any part of that tooth, you have the wrong angle. Now when you run out of teeth to sharpen, rotate the chain and keep going until you get back to your starting point. Now every 2 to 3 times you sharpen those teeth, you also need to check your cutting depth. I'm sure you've noticed by now that there are 2 parts to every tooth on your chain. There's the cutter in the rear, and that's what we just sharpened, but there's a portion that rises in front of the cutter too. This is called the raker. The difference in height between the raker and the cutter is what determines your cutting depth. And over time, as you file that cutter, that difference will become smaller and smaller, and you and your saw will have to work that much harder. So to do this, you will need what's called a depth gauge. You can find these again in your local hardware store right next to the chainsaws. You will also need a flat file like this one. Sometimes these are included with the depth gauge, but if not, you can find them in the hand tools department. Depth gauges are very easy to use. Simply place it on top of the chain so that the raker is inside the groove or opening on the gauge. Any portion of the raker that is protruding above the gauge needs to be filed down so that it is even with the gauge. I recommend removing the gauge before you file the raker to avoid filing the gauge itself. Filing the gauge means taking metal off of it, and that makes it less accurate. So I hope this video helped you all out there who have a dull chainsaw. Please like, subscribe, and leave a comment if you'd like to see more content like this. I've posted some channel links in the description below. Go ahead and check them out when you have some time. If you like this channel, I guarantee you will like those channels too. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.